We move on to Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, Chapter 6. Now, if you recall from Chapter 5, I talked about how it was an important pivotal shift in Frederick Douglass's life and how it propelled him to begin his escape to slavery. And we see that here in Chapter 6. And read the first paragraph. Do you notice anything about the tone of the first paragraph? I mean, notice, here, let me pull up my little highlighter here. Notice some words such as kindest heart. This is him talking about his mistress, of course. Finest feelings, right? She was a trade by weaver and constant application of She had been in a good degree. So she had been in a good degree preserved from the blighting and dehumanizing effects of slavery. So basically, she never had that kind of calloused heart that slave owners had. She was preserved from it. She was saved from it, and she was good, right? Talks about her goodness, and he was astonished at it. He was like, I don't know how to behave towards her. She was entirely unlike any other white woman I'd ever seen, right? Um, and she did not deem it impudent or unmannerly for a slave to look at her in the face. And most slave owners, if a slave looked at him or her, they would be upset. But she was not like that. And he felt at ease in her presence, right? This is the first time he'd ever said something like that, right? Like heavenly smiles, voice of tranquil music. So the tone he sets for his new owner, Mrs. Auld, is just so positive. He's having this great experience. However, the tone quickly changes in the next paragraph. I mean, we saw specific words that develop the tone, but here's some other things now here. Alas, this kind heart had but a short time to remain such. The fatal poison of irresponsible power was already in her hands. And do you know what that is? It's slavery. It soon commenced its infernal work. That cheerful eye, under the influence of slavery, soon became red with rage. That voice, remember how he described it as tranquil music, made all of sweet accord change to one of harsh and horrid discord, and that angelic face gave place to that of a demon. So you see that juxtaposition, that antithesis that he's providing here? How she was once this beautiful, kind slave owner, mistress, but she changed. Now, what changed? Well, at first, she was nice, she was kind, and she began teaching Frederick Douglass the alphabet, the ABCs. And as she was progressing, suddenly her husband, Mr. Auld, who was a slave owner for many years, he's the brother of Lucretia Auld. So he is the brother-in-law of Lucretia Auld. So he's the son-in-law of Colonel Lloyd. And so he um, found out what Sophia Auld was doing, and he ordered her to stop. And he says things like right here, if you teach an N-word an inch, if you give an N-word an inch, he will take an L. An N-word should know nothing but to obey his master, to do as he is told. Learning would spoil the best N-word in the world. Now, if you teach that N-word how to read, there would be no keeping him. It would forever unfit him to be a slave. So there's this intentional desire to keep the slaves uneducated. And after that, then Sophia Auld becomes mean, and we'll see that in the next few chapters how she becomes even more mean. But interestingly, and as you read down, um, he became more enticed to learn as a result of that. And then he's kind of new to Baltimore now. He grew up in a plantation with Colonel Lloyd, and now he's in Baltimore, the city, which he really wanted to go to, as you saw in chapter 5. And he sees a difference in the way that these slaves in Baltimore are treated. in Baltimore, in the city, these slaves are much more free, right? They're less constrained than the slaves on the plantation. That's what this paragraph is talking about. They're better fed and clothed. They enjoy privileges that other slaves on the plantation couldn't know, and there's some decency. And it's because a slave owner, didn't want to show that he was treating his slaves poorly. So it was all kind of a show, and you see that. The reason why he ends the chapter with Mr. Hamilton, who owned two slaves, Henrietta and Mary, he ends with the story of just how cruel this slave owner was to these two slaves, because he wanted to show that even though city slaves were treated better, there was still many atrocious activities going on. I mean, just read this last paragraph. It's just horrible the way that they were treated. And so he wants the readers to understand that even though there were decent people like Sophia Auld, like city slaveholders, even though there was some sense of decency to these slave owners, there was still horrible, atrocious acts being committed. And it wasn't just um, the people who were bad. I mean, this is not the case of, hey, there's just a few bad apples. This is the whole institution of slavery being evil. And that's really what he's setting up here in this chapter, is showing that it's not the people, it's not the slaveholders who are evil, it's slavery. And when that gets perpetuated, that infects people as it did Sophia Auld. And so it turns people who could potentially have been really good people into evil people. And so it's really the institution of slavery that needs to be removed. It's a systemic injustice, a systemic racism that exists that needs to be changed.